of the Astros here in just a few. But first, we speak to the good professor, Josh Blackman. Josh? Professor?
Good morning, Michael.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, my friend?
You know, there was a woman who called up that said she really liked our guest after you were on the next day. You made that much of an impression. And I said, oh, the black man. And she said, oh, I had no idea.
Not quite.
Is that evil or what?
I've been getting this my entire life, so I'm used to it.
Big ruling. The ruling on Donald Trump supposedly inciting violence at the rally. Can you set up the fact pattern like a first-year law student responding to his professor and lay out what the issue at hand was and what this means?
Sure. So
state the facts, student Blackman.
Last March in Louisville, Trump held a rally at an airport, and you may recall these rallies got very rowdy. And at one point, there was a disruption, and Trump started screaming, quote, "Get him out of here." At that moment, a couple of the people in attendance started roughing up these protesters, and they actually caused physical injuries. These injuries resulted in a lawsuit not only against the hooligans, but also against Trump. And they said this phrase, "get him out of here," was trying to incite violence. Trump says, no, I was telling security to get him out of here. Yesterday, a federal judge in Kentucky ruled that Trump was actually potentially inciting a riot. He didn't say he definitely was, but he said there was a possibility that he was inciting violence. So therefore, a lawsuit could proceed against the President of the United States.
And that would be a civil lawsuit.
Exactly. Trump actually defended, saying that he's protected by the First Amendment. And unless he's actually inciting, imminent right-away violence, it doesn't count. The judge says, you know what, based on your past statements, what you said at other rallies, I think that's sufficient to find that maybe you, in fact, were inciting violence. So now, Michael, comes the fun part. They get discovery. And these people, the protesters, they can put the president under a deposition.
Right, and that's all they really want, right? Bring shame, embarrassment, distraction to him.
Exactly.
Somewhat unprecedented.
These suits are very rare that you actually have someone. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, after the Michael Brown verdict, where the cop got off, there was a massive riot in Ferguson, and Michael Brown's stepfather got on top of a car and said, "Let's burn this mother effer down. Let's burn this down." And indeed, there were massive riots and burning stuff down. And even then, the cops didn't try to prosecute him for inciting violence. So these cases don't come up very often. And it's, I think another part of this movement to frustrate the president at every single step by whatever sort of litigation they can rely on.
Do you think it's a sound ruling?
To be clear what this is, the court didn't rule that Trump incited a violent.
Right. No, that there's enough to proceed.
We can go forward with this. But I think that the judge was a little bit too willing to read this against Trump. I mean, if there's a commotion going on and I say, come on, get him out of here, it's entirely plausible that we're talking to the security guards. It's not entirely clear that he was telling people, go rough them up here. So I think the ruling might be a bit of a stretch, only because he didn't consider the most obvious explanation. Trump was telling security to get him out of here.
Professor Josh Blackman is our guest. Do you think it a sound, reasonable determination to bring into play things that he has said in other rallies? Because what he said on the record there, get him out of here, I don't think anyone would take to be inciting violence. Now, there were comments of punching people in the face and things like that. Do you think that's appropriate?
Maybe, and I'm on the fence about this one because, indeed, in previous rallies, Trump said he would pay legal fees for those who rough up the protesters. So that's exactly what the judge did. What he said here wasn't enough, but what was said before was sufficient to suggest it was imminent. I don't know if that's what the case law supports, that you can go to previous statements made versus this is some sort of emergency. Let's do this now. Let's riot. Let's bust these guys up. And on that front, I think the ruling is questionable. Not haven't made up my mind quite one way or the other.
When you look at the efforts of some of these advocates or activist groups and advocacy groups that are out there and the legal teams they're going to be throwing at Trump, what else is hovering out there that you would see on his landscape as being potential distractions?
The biggest suit, Michael, involves part of the Constitution most people have never heard of. I want to talk about Mr. Smarty Pants. This is the Emoluments Clause. And the clause generally states that officers of the United States can't receive gifts, payments from foreign nations. And a lawsuit was filed saying that Trump's hotel in D.C. is violating the Emoluments Clause because all these foreign dignitaries are staying there, and he's basically getting payments from all these foreign governments. It's an unconstitutional coercion of funds. The problem here is that this clause has never, ever, ever been litigated, ever, 200-something years. And there are rampant debates of what the hell is an emolument, right? What is this? My tentative conclusion is an emolument does not include a arm's length transaction. That if I stay at a Trump hotel, I'm not trying to bribe the U.S. government. But this case now sits before a federal judge in Manhattan, and they're going to try to basically make Trump divest his assets, get his tax returns, open up all his businesses to the courts. I mean, that's the purpose of this litigation. It's not about constitutional vindication. I'll give you an example. Barack Obama sold books to China. Royalties were made for his books sold to China. If Trump's hotel is an emolument, then Obama's book sold to China government is an emolument.
Sure.
So this is not new. This is merely a way to frustrate Trump.
3 Democrats, as of last night, flipping in the Senate to come out and announce publicly that they would be supporting Gorsuch for the Supreme Court. I got 1 minute, real quick. The politics aside, anything come out of the Gorsuch hearings that surprised you, disappointed you, inspired you about him? Did you learn anything new about him?
I didn't learn much new, Michael. He was pretty guarded. And whenever they tried to push him on something, he simply said, well, that's not appropriate. I did notice he was a little bit more ornery than John Roberts. Roberts was very smooth, but a couple of points, Gorsuch got a little irritated, and the questions were pretty rough on him. But the bottom line is we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So as a result, the Republicans will use what's called a nuclear option, which means we get rid of the filibuster and we confirm a Gorsuch with 54, 55, 56, whatever it happens to be. But going forward, this means that to confirm a Supreme Court justice, you no longer need to have 3/5 majority. You can just go with a simple majority.
I don't know that that's necessarily such a bad thing, but another discussion for another day. Professor Josh Blackman, thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you, sir.
As always, the expert, Mr. Smarty, he's the original Mr. Smarty Pants.
The Michael Berry Show. Michael Berry.